Welcome to the Living After Faith podcast, a podcast designed to help you as you leave religion and move forward with your life. We are the official podcast of RecoveringReligionists.com, a recovery group founded by Dr. Darrell Ray, the author of The God Virus. We welcome your feedback. You can contact us by going to livingafterfaith.com, at facebook.com/livingafterfaith, and follow us on Twitter at LAF with me. And now, here's today's program on Living After Faith with Rich and Deanna Joy Lyons.
I'm Rich Lyons.
And I'm Deanna Joy Lyons.
Come laugh with us.
Today, our guest is the lovely and talented Brian Dalton, also known as Mr. Deity, with his fabulous web series, which depicts a deity who is kind of working through all of the things that I think a lot of us have worked through in our minds. Now, what you may not know is he has also come out of religion, so we're going to talk about that today.
And first, I'd like to say it's been a long time since I've, spoken with God, and I hope that you're not offended. And but in this program, God's actually going to speak back to us, right, Brian?
I hope so. I'll see if I can channel him if you need him.
Welcome to the program today.
Thanks. That's the first time I've ever been introduced as being lovely.
Oh, excellent.
That's a treat. Thank you.
So you, I believe, were raised Mormon. Is that correct?
Yep. I was I was in the church for 27 years, 10 of which I was pretty. I was hip deep in it. You don't get deeper into it than I was.
You know, that's a really common story. A lot of our interviews, people were just absolutely up to the neck in it. They involved themselves so heavily. And, I wonder if sometimes that's because maybe they had some doubts at first, and then they said, okay, I have to dive into this to resolve my doubts. Do you think that would be accurate, or was it more just kind of like it was everywhere, and so you were always in it?
No, I had kind of my own. When I was 17, I was going out with a girl, and I was this priesthood quorum advisor. If you know anything about Mormonism, you from the time you're 12, you're serving in the church as a priesthood. Not minister. I don't know what to say it, but Mormonism has no paid clergy, so it's all lay clergy, and they get you doing it from the time you're 12 years old.
Okay.
When I was 16, I got a call from a guy who said I wasn't going to church at the time. I wasn't really interested from the time I was about 12 to 15, 16. I was doing a lot of rock and roll and other things that go along with rock and roll, and he called me up and said, I'm your priest quorum advisor now. If I'd like to see you once in my class, and you only have to come once. I just want to meet you, know who you are, because you're technically my ecclesiastical responsibility, and you never have to come again if you don't want. I thought that was the sweetest deal ever, so I went, and it turns out this guy was just one of the most dynamic, charismatic, interesting, funny guys I'd ever known, and he swept me up a bit, and then I had my own little spiritual experiences, so to speak, and I just went in head over heels. I got down on my knees and had my burning in the bosom, like Mormons are wont to do, and I was just nuts about it. I loved it. I thought it was interesting, and I dealt with the biggest questions in the universe. Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? Why am I here? It's big stuff. It's heady stuff. So it was fascinating to me as a 17-year-old.
Yeah, I can understand that. I was studying a lot of on my own, a lot of weird demon haunting books and all sorts of mysteries of the Titanic and Lost Atlantis and all that stuff. That's an age where I think you're so excited for finding out about the world, and you finally feel like you have a way to explore. You have resources to, where to find books about things, and where to look stuff up on the internet, and you go, wow, there's a whole freaking crazy world out there, and I want to learn everything I can about the stuff that I'm interested in.
Well, unfortunately, there was no internet at the time. If there had been, I might have been able to come across the information that ultimately doomed me within the church. I think a lot easier. It's so much easier now. When I was finding my way out of it, it was not easy. I mean, you had to buy these books that were published by, very small publishers because it was such a niche kind of market, and the books cost you, sometimes $50 to get one of these books because they weren't published in high volumes. And all of that. Nowadays, I have people coming up to me all the time when I lecture, former Mormons saying, oh, I got out. I said, when? A couple years ago, we looked at the internet and, we found out about all this stuff, and that was pretty much it. So it's a lot easier now because of the internet than it was back when I was trying to do it.
What was it that led you out? How did the exodus begin?
Yeah, I'm really up on this because I just wrote an article for Free Inquiry that'll be coming out in October about my whole leaving Mormonism. But basically, the problem is that Mormonism is entirely based on two things. Number one is the whole burning in the bosom thing. You read the Book of Mormon and then you're instructed to pray about it. And if you feel good about it, that means God's telling you that it's true. And so as you grow older, I think if you hit 20 and you're not totally convinced that you cannot know things that way, you're probably not the brightest bulb in the lamp, because your heart, God speaks to your heart supposedly, and by the time I was 18, I kind of figured out my heart's not a good indicator of truth or value or anything like that, because I'd been wrong about so much stuff that I wanted to be right about, and when you're relying on your heart, you can make yourself think and feel great about just about anything, and then you get clobbered in the head and you realize, boy, that was not a good path. So the first problem is that I figured out kind of early on that I didn't quite trust my heart. I'd said I'd had God speak to me through personal revelation via prayer and all that stuff about things that just turned out to be crap. So I distrusted that. That was number one. Number two is I kind of figured out I need some better way to know things. And fortunately, Mormonism kind of helped out because Mormons are like every other religious group. They love the idea of faith, but when push comes to shove, they rather have evidence. So Mormons had been working for years to come up with all kinds of evidence about, the Native Americans and who they were. And there were so many books written by people who were looking into the Nag Hammadi library or the Dead Sea Scrolls and that kind of stuff, and drawing parallels and saying, see, Joseph Smith was connected to some ancient wisdom and blah, 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 blah. And so I thought, okay, evidence, that seems to work. But along the way somewhere, I started learning the rules of evidence and how you're supposed to really assess evidence and what really constitutes evidence and yada, yada, yada. And, Mormonism is unlike almost any other religion in that it's entirely based on empirically testable claims. So, for instance, you can go find out now. This is another reason why this was harder when I was doing it. Among the claims Mormonism makes are things like that the Native Americans are Hebrews, that they came here to a land that was completely unoccupied in about 600 BC. We know that's not true anymore. We know they're not Hebrews because there's DNA evidence, and not a single Native American tribe has ever tested to be in any way connected with Hebrews. And then you've got, it made all kinds of claims about the kind of societies they built. They were middle-aged. They had the wheel and chariots and swords and pigs and horses and elephants that just were never here before Columbus. So there are just so many empirical problems with the story he told. And then when you look back on it, what you find out was this was a pretty common story. Joseph Smith didn't come up with this all on his own. You had people coming here and saying, gee, who are these people? We don't know anything about them. And somebody, came up with the idea, well, let's look at our Bible, because that's the source of all truth. And gee, you know what? There were these lost tribes of Israel that we don't know where they went. They must have come here, and these people must be the lost tribes of Israel. So it wasn't even an original idea that Joseph Smith had. And all of that kind of stuff kind of pushed me out, at least theologically and philosophically. And then, in 1992, the Mormon Church started excommunicating historians and feminists and scholars and that kind of thing. And it was such a Galileo moment. I said, that's it. I'm done. I got to get out of here.
So when you came out, what happened as far as Brian Dalton? Did you walk away from it unscathed? Were there consequences? How did your life adjust to that change?
Well, there were certain consequences. I mean, I pretty much lost every Mormon friend I'd had, with the exception of two people that I still keep in contact with from my childhood. It's a very insular group, and if you're not buying into it, you're pretty much out. Which I understand. I mean, that's I think you would find that in most religions. You can't be a born again evangelical and then become an atheist. Although at the time I wasn't quite yet that far gone. I mean, one of the first things I did was I had a 3-year-old daughter at the time, and I was still deluded enough to think that you needed religion to raise a good child and all that stuff. So I considered converting to Judaism first, and found that difficult just because of the whole ethnicity thing. And then went to Catholicism, and they told me, well, we don't want you here unless you really believe it. And I just couldn't do that. So I was kind of on my own for a while. And this is going to be the irony of ironies. The person who got me into skepticism was Dr. Laura.
Wow.
Yeah. Now that sounds weird, but here's the way it went. Mormons are very conservative, kind of right wing. If you go into the Glenn Beck mode, they're absolute right wing nut bars. But for the most part, they're generally very Republican and all that. And that's still who I was. I didn't quite change all my politics and everything like that. Didn't rethink everything. So I was still listening to Dr. Laura, and she had mentioned at the time that she had written a piece for a magazine called Skeptic Magazine about false memory syndrome. So I picked up the magazine, I read her article, and then I started reading through the rest of it, and I went, oh my gosh, this is exactly the way I've come to think about things. This is amazing. This is great. She was on the board of Skeptic Magazine at the time before she got religion with a vengeance, as Woody Allen would say. She was a good skeptic. So she got religion and ultimately, left the board of Skeptic Magazine and all that kind of stuff. But the damage had been done, as at least as far as I was concerned. So I started going to the Caltech lectures series that they have out there, and then I became friends with Michael. I designed the previous incarnation of Skeptic Magazine before this latest version. And I've just been, they've been my people ever since.
I had no idea about Dr. Laura because as long as I've been aware of her, she's been kind of a raving nut bar.
Yeah, she used to do some really, really good, just basic radio talk psychology in the vein of Dr. David Viscott, who I used to work for a while back, and then and Dr. Tony Grant. She was just an entertaining talk radio person, and then she got religion and kind of went a little nuts.
That happens to the best of us on occasion, as a lot of our listeners can attest.
I think it's a good argument against, M. Scott Peck wrote this terrific little book called The Road Less Traveled.
Yeah.
Years and years ago. It was a perennial bestseller, and then he became religious and wrote one of the stupidest books I've ever read in my life, and I've always said this is one of the greatest cases against religion. Is the man wrote a brilliant book before he got religion, then he got religion, and he becomes an idiot. So,
People of the Lie, was that the other?
Yes, yeah. Exactly, yeah.
There's a certain sort of suppressing of your, skeptical muscle when one is like really deeply involved in religion. And, I don't want anybody to think like we're going, hey, all you religionists are really dumb, because that's not the case. But, when you start to suppress the idea that you're supposed to think about things, you just go, oh, well, if I, start questioning what's going on, it's, that's kind of wrong.
Yeah, questioning
I wonder
sin.
if that can kind of lead you right back into sort of some off-the-wall thinking.
One of the greatest principles that we've discovered just in terms of being human, and not even being human, just being on the planet and maybe in the entire universe, is the idea of some kind of competition to get you, going back and forth and trying to, you get closer and closer to the truth as you get this some kind of competitive play back and forth. We use it a bit in our court system, but I think in a kind of a messed up way. But we certainly use it in science because, as a scientific theory is established, one of the ways a scientist can make a name for himself is to take down an established theory, or at least, expand upon it to open up the world. And those kinds of things, I think, keep us honest. And anyone who says don't question or don't look at other points of view is just keeping you from getting closer and closer to the truth. Not that we'll ever get there, but at least we can move forward.
Absolutely, I agree with that. One thing that I hear from people is that we skeptics and atheists are running around yelling, "We have the truth," with a capital T, and we're trying to suppress inquiry and suppress questioning, and anything that doesn't agree with us, nobody will fund their studies or pay any attention to them, and I think that's probably one of the greater disservices that is done to scientific skepticism and skepticism in general. Just that idea, like nobody is running around yelling, "We have the truth and you shut up and don't question us." We're like, please, break down our most fundamental beliefs about the universe, because that's how we learn stuff, and that's beautiful.
Right. Challenge is a good thing. It's not evil. But that is the message of religion, particularly biblical religion. That you don't ask questions. You just do what God wants. The funny thing is that's not necessarily the case in early Judaism. You have Israel wrestling with God, which is that's what the name Israel means, literally to wrestle with God. You have people constantly questioning him. When he's talking about burning down or taking down Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham and Lot and everybody's there saying, it doesn't sound cool. What if we can find a few good people, and that kind of thing. There is a lot of questioning going on, and somehow that turned into, at some point, nope, you can't question anything. I don't know how this stuff happens, but it always tends to go that way when you have some kind of authority-based ideology.
Yeah, I first read that story actually just within the last year. I never been really a Bible reader, but I had like a children's Bible. So now I've been, just reading like a New International. I've got the Message version, and I'll delve into King James if I want to be confused. But that story about Abraham questioning God about burning down Sodom and Gomorrah, I was so surprised. I told Rich, I was like, "Rich, do you know that this guy tried to talk God out of burning down?" And he goes, "No, what if I can find 5 people? Okay, what if we can find 3 people?" And Rich looks at me and goes, "I know, yeah."
A little background, I was a preacher for 20 years, so obviously would have to know, right? But
so many of these stories, I was going, oh my God, I had no idea it was like this. And yeah, somewhere along the line, things kind of changed, dogma set in or whatnot. But I find it so fascinating to read like the Old Testament stories and kind of where it all came from. You mentioned Israel, the borders of the land of Israel that and where everybody's fighting is mentioned in the Bible. And that's one of the things I always wanted to get down to the bottom of is, why is everybody fighting over this patch of land? And I've, another one of those aha moments. Oh my God, Rich, did you know that this is between the Nile River and this other river, and that's why everybody's fighting over this little sliver of land, because God said you have to chop off the end of your ding dong and you can have it? Just amazing to me. So I haven't always been a church-going person. I'm sure you can tell, but very cool stuff.
By the way, I'm not taking that deal. You know what I mean?
No.
Saying thanks, but no thanks. But apparently that, if you're a desert dweller, you just go for it.
The end of it's not that important.
Right.
So how on earth did you come up with the concept and the implementation of Mr. D? Once I became open to myself that I was an atheist and started looking at different things online, I stumbled across Mr. Deity, and it has just been an incredible find. Just beautiful to see the thought process and how it makes so ridiculous some of the things that in the Bible you don't generally think through, and then you get to that place where you hear God, Mr. Deity, working through those ideas.
The idea was basically just to, the first episode was written after the tsunami, and I was so sick of hearing people talk about, the people who got saved, and because people don't think about what that means for the people who didn't get saved. It's like, God saved your kid, but what, he hates me? My kid, had 3 kids die in the flood or so. And there's so much thinking like that that's just not well thought through. Because there are a lot of evils that don't happen to us that could. None of us, accidentally walks into a vortex and is wiped out immediately, or we can't harm each other with our thoughts or that kind of thing. So at a certain point, there were literally choices that had to be made by the Creator, if you assume there's a Creator, and conversations may have been had with himself or, with an assistant, or, I just started imagining just the fact that at some point these are decisions that have to be made and conversations have to be had. And so we wrote that episode, and that's pretty much what it's all about, is taking things and making them very conversational, because religion is one of those things that is very abstract, and we talk about these ideas, but a lot of times if you really start to pick at them, you realize we don't know what the hell we're talking about. One of my favorite ones is, we talk about God being outside time. Well, what the heck does that mean? What does it mean to act in any way outside time? We did a whole episode on how do you create time without time, because to create anything, there has to be a moment when there is nothing of the thing, and then you create the thing, and then there it is. So what does it mean to create anything? And don't you already have to have, if you're creating a universe that's governed by cause and effect, you already have to have cause and effect in place, because when you do something, you're becoming the cause of something that will affect the other thing. So those laws have to already be in place, and you just realize that this whole idea is just so silly. What, for instance, what kind of personal relationship can you have with a being outside of time who knows everything? You're going to have a conversation with them, really? They know everything you're going to say, and they're probably bored to tears by it already because they've been living with it forever. So if forever even means anything to them. These are ideas that someone came up with, but they Stephen Law, the great philosopher in England, said it's like talking about a mountain outside of space-time. Well, what does that mean? A mountain is defined by space-time, so that's what we try to do with the show. We try to concretize these kind of abstract ideas, and in the process, hopefully people go, yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
That's awesome. That is one of the things that I've noticed watching the episodes. And I was reading somewhere in an interview where somebody had mentioned that you get mail from religious people, even some clergy, and they find the questions and the absurd sort of abstract nature of following these questions with the Mr. Deity episodes, that they find it very amusing. They're not offended by it at all.
Right. Having been religious, one of the things that I knew, because I was a pretty ecumenical guy, had a lot of Jewish friends and Catholic friends, and ranged all over the place. The one thing I knew is that most religious people are not the kind of crazy right-wing evangelical nuts that you see on TV. Those are the people who get the attention because they're so absurd. But the vast majority of religious people are, they have some. What do I want to say? They have some. They're not crazy. I mean, there are big questions to be asked about where we come from. We don't know things. I personally don't think that we don't know means anything more than that. But people cling to other ideas, but they're not stupid, and they won't even get offended by some pretty controversial religious humor, because they know there are problems within their own, schema of things, they get it. They can laugh at it. They're you know, it's really not this dichotomy of these kind of, you know, acerbic atheists versus these nutbar right-wing religious folks. Most of us are way in the middle somewhere.
I think everybody just kind of gets more attention. The most vocal and the most vehement and most passionate arguments on either side are the most interesting ones. So those are the ones you hear about in the news. It's the clashes between, you know, for instance, the Catholic Church just now said that they're going to boycott all New York politicians because gay marriage was passed. Like, you know, you don't hear about all of the Catholics in New York who say, well, that's great, we're happy.
Yeah, it really, you know, our entire media is driven by the whole man bites dog kind of thing. You know, what's different, what's weird, what's strange. That's what's news. You know, it's a little discouraging. As
people who work in the news ourselves, we understand the impulse is, you know, you want to be chill and tell stories, but the thing is, what sells and what gets people's attention is, you know, crazy car fires or, you know, people going nuts. And
yeah, in Seattle, it takes a shooting or a kitten to get people's attention.
Yeah, we're fond of the freeway chases out here in LA.
That's what I've heard. There have been some really epic ones.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The white Bronco was killing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, I just thought of a great idea for episode title for this one.
Yeah.
Mr. Deity finds your conversation interminably boring.
You like that?
It may be a little long, but actually, it should be more. It should be just God finds your.
Mr. Deity finds your conversation boring. You like that, Brian?
Well, you know, in the show we have Mr. Deity keeps his all-knowingness turned off because it's just we set that up in the first episode of season 4, which is a prequel season, but it's not without some theological merit because there's a very famous book by Rabbi Harold Kushner called Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? And when you read the book, what you realize he's come down to is that God turned off his all-powerfulness. Now, I always thought if you were going to turn off one or the other, you know, because you got those 3 legs, all-powerful, all good, and all-knowing. If you're going to turn off one of those, it would certainly be the all-knowing stuff because, you know, it just, first of all, if you're all-knowing, how do you ever have a surprise party? That would just suck. And how do you have conversations with anyone? So in the Mr. Deity universe, Mr. Deity doesn't keep his all-knowingness on. So it's possible to actually have a conversation with him where he doesn't know exactly what you're going to say next. We're going to do an episode about that in the season 5 about where he turns on his all-knowingness and we see how obnoxious it is, you know, to try to have a conversation or any type of relationship with someone who's all-knowing.
That's going to be a fun episode.
Yeah, that'll be a fun one.
With the Mr. Deity, do you consider yourself an activist? Do you consider yourself, you know, I guess the motivation behind it, what is in it for Brian Dalton?
Well, you know, it's funny because we originally started this to kind of, I had made a feature film in 2003 that did fairly well on the kind of the indie film festival circuit. And we were offered distribution, and the IFC recommended that we turn it down and reshoot the movie ourselves. And so we were trying to get a little funding for it and had a hard time. Everybody wanted a name, and we thought, well, why don't we do this web thing? Maybe we'll make a little bit of a name for ourselves and we can get some funding. And then it just kind of took over my life. It was something I was already passionate about anyway, and I just didn't understand how it was going to take off at the time. And now, yeah, I've definitely turned into a bit of an activist. The thing that really did it for me, this show was a little more moderate before 2008, when California's Prop 8 law passed. It shocked me and it stunned me, and it made me kind of realize why I was doing this or why I should be doing it more with a bent to, you know, kind of change people's minds a little more, maybe hit a little harder, because that was a perfect example of people being told to do something like sheep via my old religion, Mormons, and opening up their pocketbooks and pouring a ton of money into Prop 8. and it having a huge impact on society. And it was the thing that made me remember how dangerous religion can be, because that was clearly, we live in a country where we have the 14th Amendment that says people should have equal protection under the law. And the only reason they don't is because of this book that says abomination, homosexuality is an abomination. That's it. That's basically the only reason. Nobody has any science behind it saying, it's not good for society, or it's not good for kids to be raised amongst gay parents. None of it lines up in any kind of meaningful secular way. It's only about a book and what people believe God said 2,500 years ago, when they still thought the earth was flat and there was a firmament dome over us, keeping the sun and the stars up there. I mean, it's really obscene when you come to think about how much of our lives for quite a long time have been dominated by a book which is, quite frankly, one of the most heinous little pieces of literature ever written, in my view. To me, there's no more evil, insidious idea, for instance, than the idea of salvation by grace, where God doesn't care what you do, only what you think and believe. That, to me, is one of the most evil ideas ever in the history of man. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of became a little bit more of an activist after that. I mean, really, 9/11 should have done it for me, and I'm not sure why it didn't. But the Prop 8 really hit home. It was a very close to home thing. Partially, probably because my own people, my old group, Mormons, had played such a key role.
Yeah, I could see how that would make you very uncomfortable. How that used to be the people that I thought were so pretty loving and tolerant and awesome, but since you've been separated from it for a while, you can kind of see a little more closely. Right. I've gotten so much interest in my ex-Mormon past as I go on these lectures and talk to people. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have 2 Mormons now running for president. So I'm actually trying to get some kind of book deal to write a little memoir of my life in Mormonism, but also actually just talk about the ideas, a lot of which people don't know anything about. There's a lot of stuff in there. For instance, pretty much the key idea of all Mormonism. This is an idea without which Mormonism just fails. You just have to chalk it up as and write it off as ridiculous and done. The idea is that God punishes people by darkening their skin. That's pretty much the premise of the entire Book of Mormon. And if that idea, if that's not true, then the Book of Mormon is just a piece of junk and we can throw it out and be done with. And Mormons need to start being asked that on a frequent basis, including Mitt Romney and Huntsman. I would like to know from both of them, do you believe that God punishes people by darkening their skin? And if you don't, then why do you believe in the Book of Mormon? That's an excellent point.
Very powerful.
I hope somebody runs that by them.
Maybe Rolling Stone would. They've been pretty kick-ass lately. Yeah, they could do something like that.
Where do you see Mr. Deity going from here?
Well, we've talked about, doing it as a half-hour TV series on some gutsy network, probably a cable thing.
Oh, that'd be cool.
We don't know if that's ever going to happen because there's still a lot of people in the center of the country who would freak out, quite frankly. And I don't know that we're going to find anyone to do that. We've talked about a Mr. Deity movie. We've been talking with people across the pond about funding something like that. I don't know if that's going to happen either. We may end up at some point doing it on our own because we have the wherewithal to make our own films. But right now we're kind of focused on making something a little more mainstream, a feature film of our own, hopefully to start shooting at the end of this year. So we'll see how that goes. But we're going to continue doing Mr. Deity. I've probably got at least 2 more seasons in me. There's still a lot of material to go over. and a lot of stuff that we haven't dealt with. We've never even done an Ark episode, so we got to do a Noah thing at some point. Nothing about David. There's just a zillion topics, because God's pretty much got his hand in everything all throughout history. So there's a lot there, but I don't know if I can keep making them and being funny and somewhat insightful. I guess I'll keep doing it. Otherwise, at some point, I might burn out and just have to be done with it. But we'll see. I definitely got at least one more season in me. I know that because a lot of them are already written. So they just don't fit in with the timeline that we've got right now. This fourth season has been tough, and I think we've lost some people because it's been so different. It's been a sequential, you have to follow all of them through to kind of get the storyline that's going on. And season 5 will go back to where we can just jump around and do vignettes and all that kind of thing.
Kind of as a final question, what would you say to someone who has recently made the decision, I can't be Mormon anymore? What would you say to that person? They may still be going to church, or they're on the fence, but in their mind, the mind has been made up. Now they've got to do something. What would you tell them to do?
That's a really tough question because unless you know where they're headed, kind of thing. Like I was already a skeptic when I left Mormonism. I didn't know it at the time, but you'd almost want to talk to the person and see where they're at and where they want to head, because there are a lot of people who leave Mormonism who don't leave religion. For me, it was, when I looked back on Mormonism was just a little microcosm to me of how religion evolved and originated, because it's basically one of those times where people have a mystery and they go, oh, well, here's what I think it is, and they come up with something, and then someone follows it, and there's no science behind it. There's no actually looking into it. There's just kind of a, in this case, he said, God told me that the Native Americans are Hebrews. And there was a lot of anecdotal kind of circumstantial evidence that you could look at and go, yeah, that sounds pretty good. And that's what they did. But, when you look back on the Bible, we just did an episode on the 6 days of creation, and you look at that, and it's just, one of the things that one of the qualities that God's supposed to have is transcendence. And if you look at these people who wrote down stuff after they claimed to have talked to him, there's just no transcendence in it to be found. The 6 day creation story is one of the most absurd, silly ideas ever in the history of man. Even the way it's written, with God creating things on the first day and then he goes and he creates them again on day 3 or day 4, or it's just, well, I thought you were, we did this whole thing where I thought you were creating heaven and earth on day 1. Yeah, here it is. Oh, well, yeah, but yeah, we can fix it in post is the line that we used, which is pretty much what Christian apologists have been doing ever since.
Yeah.
So to me, I was able to look back on that experience and say, okay, I get that this is the way this stuff happens, is people make up stuff. And, look, if you're out there wandering in the desert, 4,000 years ago, and you don't understand the way the world works at all, it's a very plausible idea that, God made there was a big God up there who created everything in 6 days, or, snapped his fingers. I mean, if you believe in magical beings, magic is magic. You can do anything. All things are plausible with God, as we said in the latest episode. But, now that we know a little bit more about the way the world works, I think those people who are leaving any religion should probably find out a little bit more about that. Find out what people think who are not enamored with supernaturalism, because that's really what it comes down to. Basically, what are you ultimately believing? Do you believe there are supernatural forces that control this world and have effect on it, or do you believe that this world is just the way it is and came to through means that we don't understand, but that no body, no person or persona is behind it? That's, I would suggest that they just try to get a little better handle on, what I did. There was a great quote in a book called The Examined Life, where Robert Nozick, who was the philosopher at Harvard for a long time, said, I don't agree with Socrates that the unexamined life is not worth living. That's too harsh. But it's to the extent that you don't examine your own thoughts and know what you think, you're not living your own life. You're living somebody else's. And what I realized is that I had a lot of ideas in my head that weren't necessarily mine. I'd glommed onto them because they sounded good. Somebody said them and whatnot. But at a certain point, I think all of us have to kind of dump all of the baggage that we have, put it to the side, and then examine it and say, am I going to keep this idea? Does it have merit? Am I going to bring it with me into the future, or am I just going to leave it here and move on? And that's what I did. That's probably what I would recommend to everybody, whether they're leaving a religion or not. Do you know what you think? What you think, not what you've been brought up to believe, or do you look yourself in the mirror and say, do I believe that? In the end, that's why I left Mormonism. I couldn't look myself in the mirror and say, yeah, I believe Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. Couldn't do it.
Our guest today on Living After Faith, Mr. Deity himself, Brian Dalton. I'm Rich Lyons.
And I'm Deanna Joy Lyons.
Come laugh with us.
Thank you for listening to the Living After Faith podcast with Rich and Deanna Joy Lyons. Living After Faith is a podcast designed to help you as you leave religion and move forward with your life. We are the official podcast of RecoveringReligionists.com, a recovery group founded by Dr. Darrell Ray, the author of The God Virus. The music for this show is provided by Morrison's Prophecy. See livingafterfaith.com for a link to more music from Morrison's Prophecy. We welcome your feedback, and you can find phone numbers and email addresses at livingafterfaith.com, at facebook.com/livingafterfaith, and follow us on Twitter at LAF with me.